concerning the relationship between Cambridge Analytica and Facebook, protection of citizens' data and private life as a defense line against electoral manipulation.
Minister Panayotova to take the floor on behalf of the Bulgarian presidency.
Thank you, President. Honorable members, the news that Cambridge Analytica used Facebook profiles to perform targeted political messaging has led to a loss of trust all over the world. People are concerned about the security of the personal data they share on social networks and digital platforms. In order to find out whether Facebook and Cambridge Analytica breached data protection rules, enforcement authorities are investigating. At EU level, the Article 29 Committee, which gathers the data protection authorities of the Member States, is following the developments closely. At the political level, the concerns are real and are taken seriously. You can see that in the conclusions of the European Council of the 22nd and 23rd of March. It has also led Commissioner Jourová to demand further clarification from Facebook about the extent to which EU citizens were affected. And the debate here today gives another political signal from the European Union that we are worried. I am grateful that you have asked the Presidency to participate in your discussion on data protection and citizens' privacy as a line of defense against election manipulation. The Facebook and Cambridge Analytica case touches the heart of the EU core principles. The rights to protection of personal data and privacy are enshrined in the European Charter on Fundamental Rights. Those rights are the basis for the new EU data protection rules laid down in the General Data Protection Regulation, which will become applicable in a few weeks. The GDPR will help to protect personal data in the European Union as it empowers persons to more easily find out what personal data companies hold about them and for which purposes such data are processed. Furthermore, the GDPR provides for the possibility for data protection authorities to impose high fines. This will discipline companies to comply with the rules. And finally, the GDPR provides for a consistency mechanism. This ensures that the national data protection authorities coordinate amongst each other their decisions so that the European Union speaks with a single voice. The Facebook and Cambridge Analytica case posed a lot of other fundamental questions than data protection. How can we protect democratic elections in times of massive digital disinformation and manipulation? In October 2017, the Council held its annual Rule of Law dialogue on the topic Media Pluralism and the Rule of Law in Digital Age. Ministers agreed that free, reliable and pluralistic media underpin effective democracy, while digital disinformation on a massive scale has the potential to undermine it. In this context, we have all seen the recent but very timely opinion of the European Data Protection Supervisor on online manipulation and personal data. President, honourable members, the Facebook and Cambridge Analytica case has brought to the fore the importance of protecting personal data and privacy. The European Union already recognized that importance in its new data protection rules, which provide tools to protect personal data in an effective manner. The silver lining of this case is that also in other parts of the world, adequate data protection is getting the political attention it deserves. However, well-functioning data protection rules don't provide the full answer against manipulating elections. Other measures going beyond data protection are also necessary for safeguarding the rule of law and democracy. New challenges to the rule of law and human rights, such as increased level of disinformation, have to be counterbalanced by increased levels of media literacy. Current legislation is deemed to be sufficient in broad terms, but it must be better applied and supported by flanking measures such as fact-checking websites, voluntary codes of conduct, and intensified cooperation with service providers. This is already in place in several countries as well as at EU level. Let us use the protest about Facebook and Cambridge Analytica to advance the thinking on these fundamentals of our societies. In that context, it's very opportune that on the 16th of May, our leaders will discuss the need for transparent practices and full protection of privacy and personal data on the part of the social networks and digital platforms. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Minister. Now I give the floor to Commissioner Jourová.
Mr. President, honourable members, your initiative to have a plenary debate on this topic is very welcomed. This case is too important to treat it as business as usual. It is up to all of us to draw the right lessons from this Facebook Cambridge Analytica scandal. There is work ongoing on 3 aspects of this scandal. 1, personal data. Up to 2.7 million of Europeans could have been affected by this scandal. 2, broader effects on our democratic processes, elections included. And 3, criminal aspects of the case. I would like to share with you some details about the different aspects. Let me start with data protection. It has been said that the way we deal with privacy is the defining fundamental rights issue of our time. The Facebook Cambridge Analytica case shows that protection of personal data can have a major impact on our democracy and on our elections. In this House, you have realised the importance of these issues for many years and have adopted the data protection package, the so-called General Data Protection Regulation, known under the acronym of GDPR. We, Europeans, we have got this right. We have foreseen that cases like that might happen, and we wanted to be well equipped. If there is one positive thing coming out of this crisis, is the awareness about the importance of personal data protection that has been generated among ordinary citizens in Europe and around the world. All around the world, democratic countries are now looking at GDPR for inspiration. The GDPR basically gives back control of personal data to the people. For instance, consent under the GDPR must be given by a clear and affirmative action and cannot be hidden among legalistic terms and conditions that nobody ever reads. Or you have the right to take your data with you when moving to another provider. Also, the GDPR reinforces the role of national data protection authorities and gives them the possibility to impose quite dramatically high fines. The proposed e-privacy regulation further specifies the transparency requirements for browsers and apps. But aside from this positive effect, there is a serious situation which must be investigated and which must be prevented from occurring again. And let's keep in mind that the GDPR is not in place yet, so we are assessing the Facebook scandal against the currently existing laws. There is an investigation led by the UK's Data Protection Authority, the Information Commissioner's Office, or ICO. I am in close touch with ICO Commissioner and I expressed my full support in her work. I expect Facebook to cooperate fully and on the highest level of the company. There is no time to be complacent about this. I am also in frequent contact with the chairwoman of the Article 29 Working Party and the future European Data Protection Board, Madam Andrea Jelinek. In all EU data protection authorities, all EU data protection authorities have met in Brussels last week, and I am pleased they decided to launch a dedicated working group to social media, not only Facebook. Come 25th of May, when GDPR becomes applicable, it's absolutely crucial that those business models that monetize a huge amount of our personal data are under full scrutiny. The time for leniency is over. and it is good that the data protection authorities are getting ready for it. I am fully confident that European enforcers will make sure that Facebook fixes the mistakes and complies with the new data protection laws. Now, it is very important that we offer help to those almost 3 million citizens affected by the scandal. The data protection authorities issued last week information about how their interest is protected and what they can do to ensure better protection of their privacy. Finally, I was directly in contact with Facebook and I spoke to the Chief Operating Officer, Mrs. Sheryl Sandberg, last week. I underlined that I expect Facebook to provide more detailed information and to cooperate fully with the Irish and British data protection authorities. We must better and fully understand not only what happened to the data of EU citizens, but what is going on with this data still now. Of my particular concern is the information to European citizens affected by the scandal. I was told that Facebook has started to inform people last week. Facebook also confirmed that there could be more apps that harvested personal data of users and those of their friends. The information I am also getting from another source, from the British ICO. So I urged Facebook to take all necessary steps to mitigate any potential negative consequences for the users in the future. I have also advised Mrs. Sandberg that Mr. Zuckerberg should accept the invitation of the European Parliament to appear in front of the responsible committees. And Vice President Ansip has met with Mr. Zuckerberg in Silicon Valley yesterday, and the Facebook CEO reconfirmed his will to cooperate closely with the European authorities on rebuilding trust after this scandal. Vice President Ansip referred to the invitation by the European Parliament as a measure of rebuilding the trust. We also have to seriously speak about the impact this scandal might have on our democratic societies. By having access to personal information, it seems that it was possible for various actors to micro-target citizens and help spread fake news and propaganda. And this was all done in the maze of digital reality, with zero transparency and without any consent from the users. This scandal is a wake-up call for all of us to start a serious debate what role social media play today and what role they should play in our elections in the future. Traditional media are under very strict rules. Social media largely cooperate without any limits in this respect. And to be absolutely clear, social media created unprecedented opportunities to engage in a political debate and communicate directly with millions of voters. But they also created opportunities to some actors to manipulate and abuse the social media. The algorithms used in the business model of Facebook or other companies may have facilitated the spreading of fake news and untruthful posts and reinforced the so-called filter bubbles and the antagonisation within this society. So we need to understand better what is the current situation in Europe. Elections organisation is largely in the remit of the member states. However, as a commissioner responsible for the Union citizenship rights, I have invited the EU electoral authorities for a meeting at the end of April. I would like to hear from them how they handle social media and online advertising in their campaign rules, for which we send them a set of detailed questions in advance. So I do hope I will get very concrete and clear answers on the 25th of April. I would like for all of us to act responsibly and not to jump the gun. Our response should not only be about Facebook. Our response should take into account wider implications of unregulated internet. There were already some steps taken. As you might know, the Commission has initiated a code of conduct on hate speech, such as racism and xenophobia, which has shown good results. We adopted in February a recommendation on combating illegal content online. We will present next week a communication on how to tackle online disinformation, calling for more transparency, promotion of diversity of information and credibility of information online. This will be a first opportunity to refer to very first lessons from the scandal in the official policy paper. We will also adopt a communication on artificial intelligence, which, among other actions, aims at debating and developing ethical principles in this respect. The Commission is carrying out a pilot project requested by the European Parliament on algorithmic awareness building, which will focus on how algorithms can shape, filter or personalise information flows that may reinforce biases. And last week, the Commission proposed the New Deal for Consumers package, which includes collective actions in case of mass harm situations. This can be also a strong enforcement tool in case of privacy violations. Finally, there are the important criminal law investigations in this case, which need to be carried out by the national law enforcement bodies. To conclude, what is guiding our work in the Commission is a strong notion that the Internet is not a space free of rule of law. The rules that apply offline also need to be fully respected in the online world, and we need to make sure our modern data protection rules are thoroughly applied. I look forward to hearing your views today and to continue working together on these important issues for our society. Thank you.
Mulțumim și noi, doamna comisar.
Thank you, Commissioner. I will give the floor now to Mr. González Pons, 1 minute and 30.
Cambridge Analytica es solo la punta del iceberg.
The Facebook Cambridge Analytica case is one where we say our lives are duplicated and no security is asked for. The intelligence of the human being is limited by its conscious, but the artificial intelligence doesn't know any limits. As lawmakers, we must be more careful in avoiding the errors committed by human beings, whereas machines don't know anything about ethics. My generation, the baby boomers, feel that the digital world is just an extension of the analog world, but that is a mistake. What happens in cyberspace changes things. What happens on the Internet doesn't stay on the Internet. This is as old as humanity itself. Politics, lies, and democracy, this goes back to ancient Greece. Lies can be more powerful than the truth and than democracy or politics. We may face an anti-European majority here, and we must put limits to the lies. The lies are as dangerous as national populism, and they usually use this as their instrument. We cannot overlook these issues at all.
Thank you. I now give the floor to Mrs. Rodriguez, 2 minutes.
The scandal of Facebook and the Cambridge Analytica is a wake-up call. All of a sudden, everybody understands that the digital revolution involves opportunities, but also risks and sometimes threats, of creating companies without corporate responsibility, of creating jobs without proper social protection, and now about taking on board our personal data and using these for the purpose of economic and political manipulation. We just cannot accept this. And we need to regain control of our lives, and Europe must take the lead of this. This is the high moment to invent our European way for the digital revolution and to regain digital sovereignty. And the only one to gain digital sovereignty is to fully use European scale. We have taken the first step SD played a pioneer role calling in this Parliament for this regulation on general data protection. But of course, this is just the first step. We know now there is an important regulation in the hands of the Council on e-privacy, and we urge the Council to start trialogue immediately, because the urgency is clear. And of course, we want Mr. Zuckerberg to be in front of us in the European Parliament to give proper explanations and proper guarantees. But I believe, also with the Commission expectations, that we need a broader approach to pave the way for our European agenda on digital governance. And this starts with a proper assessment on how social networks work, to encourage European innovation in this area. This goes to our way to deal with artificial intelligence, and most of all, we make sure that all citizens, they count on generalized digital skills to master these major developments which are taking place.
Mulțumim, doamna Helga Stevens.
Thank you, Mrs. Helga Stevens. 1 minute and 30 seconds.
Dank u wel, voorzitter. Beste collega's.
Thank you very much, President, colleagues. Today, personal data is become a very lucrative business. These data are sold without the consent of the persons involved. Data protection in the data space is more important than ever. As citizens, we must protect ourselves against the abuse of privacy, but we must also assure the safety of our citizens. Today, we see that terrorists very often use the net and slip through the net, and they abuse data privacy. And very often, this is something that is discovered after the fact. There's data through WhatsApp and WhatsApp is used by terrorists. And this allows the terrorists to carry out their activities without being discovered. And this is an undesired effect of some of the privacy shortcomings. And so we have to create the right balance between privacy and safety and security. We cannot have one be implemented at the cost of the other. We need to make sure that they work together, and we must avoid abuse of the digital space, either by technical giants or by criminals.
Doamna Intveld, 2 minute și 30.
Thank you, Mrs. Intveld, 2 minutes 30.
Commissioner, Council, thanks to Mark Zuckerberg, the GDPR is now the best known European law ever, even in the US Congress. And I think, yes, thank you, Mark. This one's for you. And I think Mr. Zuckerberg would be well advised to appear before this House, out of respect for hundreds of millions of European Facebook users who feel deceived. There are actually more users here than in the US. And I actually think Zuckerberg should be here. We should not be visiting him in the United States. He should be here. But today's debate is not about Facebook. The European Parliament, yes, and also the European data protection authorities will scrutinise very closely whether the new Facebook privacy is compliant with all EU legislation. But we also need to take a very critical look at ourselves. We talk the talk, but do we also walk the walk? Commission and Council and dear friends, because amongst those who are voicing their outrage at Facebook are many who have consistently voted against stricter privacy protections and continue to do so. Like those, including the President of this House, dear friends, who summons Mr. Zuckerberg to European Parliament, but they voted against e-privacy. So, a bit of consistency, please. And I also note that the European data protection authorities have hardly responded to earlier reports on Cambridge Analytica and Facebook. It was known since last year. Why have they been so slow? And despite the jubilation about GDPR, member states have not nearly allocated the necessary means to the national DPA to enable them to properly enforce the GDPR. I also note that the advice of designated experts like the EDPS and Working Party 29 are being systematically ignored. Advice on data retention, PNR, safe harbour, ignored, and all subsequently scrapped by the European Court of Justice. Worryingly, decisions by the European Court of Justice are also being ignored. Now, will the Commission remain deaf to the recommendations of Working Party 29 on PNR and Privacy Shield, or act? Because while we are busy barricading the front door to keep the likes of Mr. Zuckerberg out, the back door is wide open and we're giving away our personal data by truckloads. Not just to our own government agencies, but also to other countries like the United States, with legal safeguards that carry about as much weight as Donald's tweets. I'm coming to a conclusion, Mr. Chair. European citizens are left in the cold, unprotected. Yes, the Facebook case is a wake-up call for all of us. Mr. Zuckerberg, privacy is not dead, it's alive and kicking. Thank you.
Okay. Mulțumim, doamna Keller.
Thank you, Mrs. Keller. 1 minute 30 seconds.
Thank you, dear colleagues. There are more Facebook users in Europe than there are in the US. And the social network might be based in the Silicon Valley, but it's active worldwide. And therefore, it also has responsibilities all across the globe. And I've said it before and will repeat it again, Mark Zuckerberg has to come to the EP to answer our questions. And a simple apology will not do, and will also not do if the commissioners now start to travel to the US and ask for audiences very nicely with Mr. Zuckerberg. That will simply not do. And of course, it's very worrying that one single tool can be so dominant on the market. And all of us know it can be a very annoying tool with all the ads and all the weird groups that you're being added to. But it's also, and we all know that the best way, probably the only way where you can stay in touch with most of your friends, because they are there. It's also the only place where you can share cat pictures with your grandmother. Nowhere else could you possibly do that. So we stay there. And despite the dramatic data leakages, despite the ads, despite all of that, we keep spending and wasting our time scrolling down our timeline. Facebook has become, for many in Europe, a necessity rather than a nice option. And that also means that Facebook has a huge responsibility. And so far, it has shied away from taking up this responsibility. It has ignored even most basic data protection rules. And that must be over, once and for all. And it's our duty as European legislators to make sure that our citizens and their data is protected. It's our duty. They have put the trust in us, and we need to comply with that. Thank you.
Go.
Thank you, Mrs. Ernst. 1 minute 30 seconds.
Ja, was wir heute mit Facebook.
Well, what we are experiencing today with Facebook basically is a result of what's been expected for a long time. It's no longer just about Cambridge Analytica. It's about a company which has become dominant in the global media sector without accepting any sort of moral responsibility for that. Facebook is not a neutral platform. Obviously, with every click, you end up in a world which is based on software, which decides what's shown and what isn't. And that's how gradually people can be manipulated. Now, Zuckerberg, well, he didn't know. He should have known since 2015 about this scandal. So why didn't he do something? Well, because basically it's a Facebook business model to make money out of this type of thing. So then they have to show the responsibility for that as well. Same applies to Google and Amazon. To avoid misuse, we need clear rules and consequences. And what we demand as a group is that we have full clarification of the misuse of European data by Facebook. I want Zuckerberg to come here and answer to us in the competent committee. I want to hear from him how Facebook actually intends to implement, after the 25th of May, the GDPR, when it will come into force. There are no guarantees. Okay, then we have to have the necessary rules to allow punishment of that. It's not about a crisis of trust in Facebook. It's about establishing the fundamental roles. And there, Commissioner, you need to get much more active, and you really have to ensure that all of this happens. Otherwise, people are going to have to be punished for what's happened.
Dartmouth.
The Earl of Dartmouth. 1 minute and 30.
Before going any further, let's get one myth out of the way. There are many reasons why the Brexit referendum was won or lost. Nothing to do with Cambridge Analytica was in any way material. And we should not confuse sales talk from an old Etonian with reality. Nonetheless, hidden in this lengthy statement for debate, there is a very important, indeed vital issue. Let us start from the fact that Mr. Mark Zuckerberg is not as nice as he looks. Mr. Zuckerberg's approach to business has been well set out in the feature film The Social Network. And behind all the blather and misleading PR speak about the Facebook community, there is a gruesome reality. Facebook is a monopoly. It maintains its monopoly by a variety of predatory business practices. And one simple illustration is that Facebook buys up potential competitors. This is what it did, for example, with Instagram, Messenger, and WhatsApp. But there is more. Facebook makes its money. Let there be no misunderstanding. Facebook makes its money from selling data and advertising targeted from that data. Users do not have complete control over their Facebook data, and this cannot be good. And there is still worse. It emerged in the Washington hearings that Facebook has what it describes as shadow profiles on people who have not signed up to Facebook, and these profiles are without their consent. Such data does not get deleted when leaving because these people had never joined Facebook in the first place. In its methods of collecting data, Facebook has become like a virus that you can never get rid of. This is not only distasteful, it is entirely shocking. The conclusion is clear. The problem is not Cambridge Analytica. The problem is Facebook. And the emphasis on Cambridge Analytica and election manipulation is a distraction. As I said, the fundamental problem is Facebook itself, the manner in which Facebook operates, its predatory business practices, its lack of ethical principles, its monopoly. In short, the monopoly that is Facebook needs breaking up. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Schaffhauser, 1 minute.
Colleagues, we are facing a choice that concerns our civilization, our culture, and even democracy and liberty. There is only one way that we can escape from this. We have to change our economic model. Data belongs to those who provide that data. When people exploit that data without consent, then first of all they have to pay, and secondly, well, I believe if people use data without consent, then the penalty for that has to be huge. It has to affect their turnover. We have to stop this economic model. I've proposed this in a report in this Parliament. The Parliament wouldn't even discuss my report. They wanted to rewrite it. This is absolute hypocrisy. If we don't want to change our economic model, which allows total domination, monopoly, and undermines democracy, then you are hypocrites. We have to change the economic model if you want to be credible.
Thank you. Mr. Papadakis, 1 minute.
Well, no surprise on Facebook and other social networking measures which collect and process private data for their own commercial and other ends. Every click, well, they get more data which is bought and sold to support monopolies and these multinationals trampling over other people's rights. And then they tell the users that they have to be careful. Well, basically we've seen this is the result of capitalism, which its barbarous approach is being rolled out online now as well. We've heard censorship as well, talk about censorship, but it's not working. And there are declarations about protection of data and people calling to respect rules and good use. Now, basically, it's capitalist profit-making which dictates all of this. We have to meet workers' rights and ensure that the network and everything that it's linked with actually serves those users' rights.
Thank you, Chair.
And a half.
By the Cambridge Analytica scandal that affected so many millions of people in the EU and the US. Sometimes it feels like we are living in a reality closer to that imagined by Orwell or Huxley than perhaps we would care to believe. This is an era where data is the new gold and where unscrupulous politicians and those who support them will use and abuse our personal information to make their propaganda appear as fact, to help swing elections and referenda, to essentially subvert democratic processes. Because this scandal is not only about misuse of data. This is about systems that were built for good being used against us. We need to ensure that elections and referenda that look free on the surface are actually so in reality. Now, we built our data protection regulation and privacy shield precisely because of these threats, and our legislation must be able to face this test, and any entity responsible for breaches must be held to account. And we have to examine the loopholes that still exist and how these can be closed, because people expect privacy online and we must ensure that their expectations are met. Cambridge Analytica has a lot to answer for. We have seen how they have abused of our data in the US and the UK, in many member states, including my own, Malta, where we learned that thousands of people had been affected. In many cases, we still do not know who the people who hired Cambridge Analytica were and for what purpose the 6,000 Maltese nationals and millions of EU citizens' data was harvested. And I conclude, the links between the abuse of data and our democratic processes must be investigated, and I welcome the Parliament in initiating such a process.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. SIPPEL, 3 minutes.
Thank you. Knowledge is power, and power is misused if we don't have adequate rules for the protection of the individual. Now, we've seen that lack of regulation being expressed in the current Facebook scandal, and there's been misuse of private data to manipulate voters. Well, Facebook basically is using data capitalism, and Zuckerberg can't deny that. Facebook basically is experimenting with the face recognition software, and it shows how limited the learning effect really is. But Facebook is in fact only the tip of the iceberg. The collection and processing of data has become a business model by which we are manipulated as customers and consumers, also as voters. And in the long run, we pay a lot of the digital and apparently free offers through a loss of our right to decide, our private sphere and democracy. Governments, parliaments and civil society can show now that they've understood and are indeed acting. Thanks to the data protection regulation, as of May, the EU can answer with the only language that these people understand, money. Up to 4% of global turnover could be affected by the penalties. And if these dubious apps are allowed by Facebook, then basically it will have to stand to account for that as well. But the GDPR in itself is not enough. We need also the e-privacy regulation to protect the online private sphere. E-privacy doesn't only protect personal data, but also the confidential nature of communication as a whole. The rules which have applied to date are so outdated that basically they don't even cover players such as Facebook now. Privacy and the content of communication in private Facebook messages has to be protected. Sometimes they've been read as well. And also it establishes protection provisions for personal advertising. We want strict technical specifications for browsers and tracking only with the approval of the user. But as we've seen with the basic regulation on data protection, on e-privacy, member states are putting the foot on the brake and basically are just acting on behalf of industry. The European Parliament adopted a position back in autumn. It's the member states now that, in view of the millions of people affected by Facebook, now has to follow this up as well, so that we can start these joint negotiations and we can better protect our citizens from the digital point of view.
Thank you. Mr. Dalton, 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. President. Trust is a vital commodity in the digital era, as Facebook is finding out now. If you fail in your service or in your duty of care or your protection of data, you have nowhere to hide. Consumers will desert you. Now, Facebook needs to explain what it has done and how it's going to protect users' data, not just because we demand it, but because their users demand it. Users may agree to share their own data on the site, but they didn't agree to their friends sharing their details on their behalf. Facebook needs to vet its third-party apps much more carefully, and we need to get to the bottom of what Cambridge Analytica were doing and what effect they actually had on election results. But the key for us is to learn from this. The digital revolution has empowered billions around the world, but it's embryonic and barriers are being tested by all in this uncertain, data-driven new world. The GDPR, which comes into force next month, is also testing barriers. That alone brings about much more protection of personal data. Facebook itself has said it will apply it globally. So let's find out what happened here first, see how well the GDPR works in practice, and then, when we have a full picture, assess if more legislation is needed.
Thank you. Mrs. WIKSTRÖM, 1 minute.
Thank you very much. Sanningen är att vi EU-medborgare står
We, the EU citizens, are completely unprotected. We're left out in the lurches, whereas we see the scandals engendered by Facebook and Cambridge Analytica. What happened with Facebook users is a crime, and this is a violation of everyone's right to data protection and privacy. And so Facebook needs to take responsibility as to how our data is used for political purposes. There's also the Russian influence in American politics, and so it should be clear that the rules must be enforced, and Mark Zuckerberg should accept the invitation to come here to report to us and answer our questions, because anything else would be complete.
Thank you, Ms. Albrecht. 1 minute and 30 seconds.
Colleagues, dear Commissioner, dear Council Presidency, we all can see these days advertisements by Facebook praising the general data protection regulation of the European Union as the new standard to protect privacy and data of citizens in Europe and everywhere in the world, as Facebook reacts by implementing the GDPR standards on a global level. So 37 days before the GDPR is getting even into application, it is already getting the global standard for protecting personal data. And so we can be very proud as the European Union, and especially of the Parliament, that we have a tool to protect the privacy and integrity of our citizens' life with the GDPR in place. But I would also agree it's very important to understand that there is a missing brick in this wall, and that is the e-privacy regulation, and we still need to fix that problem because the communication data needs to be protected in a specific way. It is important that Facebook is not only doing ads, as they say is their business model, but also deliver for trust in a way of delivering solutions and actions in the way of how they do their business model. The business model of just earning money by endeavoring the data of individuals has to change, because that's not only the business model of Facebook. There are other companies, we don't talk about Google, Twitter, or even companies you maybe not having heard from, like Axiom or Thomson Reuters, having your data, exploiting it and selling it. So we need to get more rules in place, especially also for consumer control, to get connectivity across the platforms in order to have a choice. Thank you very much.
Mr. Silikiotis, 1 minute.
Thank you. The Cambridge Analytica Facebook scandal has shown the risks of globalization when the power is left in the hands of a few monopolies and companies who basically use the mass information for their own benefits as well. Now, they collect the personal information from the social networks, and we speak out as GUI NGL against all of this type of approach, and we need immediately democratic control. We need measures to actually address this through the social network to ensure that personal data is protected, and they're protected against people who has any kind of access to this. We need rules, we need a comprehensive framework in the European Union for the genuine protection of personal protection. We have millions of Facebook users in Europe, and that's why we have to call for new negotiations. We have to call Facebook to come to the Parliament, and we need to ensure that the new rules are implemented as well, but we also have to talk with them together to have a...
Thank you.
Thank you, President. What has happened confirms the fact that the business model of web multinationals is based on data harvesting. Data has become the oil of the 21st century. It's used to profile consumers and users to determine their behavior and then given to third parties. What we don't have, and this is the case that Cambridge Analytica has revealed, is the fact that citizens are unaware of all of this. So what should we do? Who is deciding instead of us? What role should member states and the EU play in all of this? It's now time to put an end to the monopoly of the very few web giants who exploit our personal data and influence our behavior, and in doing so have accumulated huge fortunes. Perhaps it's started time considering our personal data as a common good that we have to protect, just like water, the territory, the coastlines, the sea. This is a huge opportunity, and the adoption of the e-privacy regulation, which is currently blocked in Council, will allow us to do this. The American economist Milton Friedman said that there's no such thing as a free lunch. What we're not paying for in money, we're paying for through our data and through less privacy. Thank you.
Mr. SOŚNIERZ, 1 minute.
Albo działania Facebooka są zgodne z prawem.
So either Facebook operates in line with law, then there is no problem, but if it acts unlawfully, then we have courts to deal with this. I think that the Parliament, which is no court, should not deal with such cases where the law is broken, because otherwise the Parliament would be busy only chasing such scandals. We cannot redraft the law each time this law is broken. We cannot adapt our law, our legislation to individual cases. You are using this opportunity to even use your clout, your red tape, to interfere with the lives of our citizens. However, this should be no pretext. Because I am not 100 happy that by the fact that Zuckerberg manages my personal data, but I do not trust you either when the EU which will deal with these, because I can always log out from Facebook, but I cannot log out from the EU bureaucracy.
Thank you. Mr. Voss, 1 minute and 30 seconds.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, I think we have to be a bit more honest here. The systematic assessment and then use of huge amounts of user data is nothing new. For many years on a regular basis, we've seen this type of thing in the media, and that's why this, of course, now is probably just the tip of the iceberg we're seeing. But as such, this is nothing new. That data is being traded in is nothing new either. And that's why we have approved the GDPR at European level. What I think we haven't quite correctly understood, and where I would say that we still haven't come up with the right answer in the future, to the use of this data is basically the fact that we have we're trying to carry an old, outdated structure into a new world. We should have thought more about approval and agreement, because basically that's the element which can guarantee also the regular assessment of this data and its use. So I think we've been a bit too relaxed in all of this, and I think that we need to bring more thought into maybe actually taking a different approach to this question. We need greater control. And let's be honest though, even with this new GDPR which is coming into force next May, we're still going to have this type of scandal, because we can't completely regulate this misuse. We want to try and see how we can establish the framework for the legal provisions to deal with it.
Thank you. Mr. Moraes, 2 minutes.
Thank you, President, Commissioner. Mr. González Pons, please don't worry about being a generation that doesn't fully understand this. The entire US Senate were not aware of what they were talking about. But there was one US Senator, Lindsey Graham, and I am of that generation. My 8-year-old knows more than I do, and I can tell you one thing. Lindsey Graham, the US Senator, when he asked the question, do the Europeans have it right, and when Zuckerberg answered reluctantly, yes, you have. This was a proud moment for our rapporteur. It was a proud moment for this Parliament, because GDPR had arrived, but more importantly, it had arrived in the subtle way in which we know, because even if GDPR was fully complied with by Facebook, only perhaps 4% of its revenue would go. With full compliance, it would not solve the problem. And this is because we are a sophisticated Parliament, as the Commissioner and others have said. We have many tools for the job, not just GDPR. Many have mentioned e-privacy because of the important consent equation within e-privacy. And we should really ask about why Council is blocking e-privacy. It is the tools for the job. But on GDPR, the issue and the overarching issue is that we have higher data protection standards than in the United States. So I want to make one clear point here, which is that we have the credibility in the EU institutions and Parliament, not just because we have millions more Facebook users than in the United States, but because we have a track record here legislatively, because we have tracked what Facebook have done wrongly for 14 years, and because we have the credibility and expertise here in this Parliament to call Mark Zuckerberg before us, to examine what Facebook is doing. And let me tell you, for anyone who is not aware, Facebook is powerful, so are the other platforms. The Indian Prime Minister today is at a Commonwealth summit, and let me tell you, millions, billions of people are on Facebook. It is powerful, elections are in danger, and our privacy is valuable. But here we have done the right thing. Let us be proud of it, and now go ahead and be credible and have those hearings.
Mulțumim.
Thank you, Mrs. McAvey. 1 minute.
Mulțumesc. Brittany Kaiser, fost angajată la Cambridge Analytica, a afirmat în fața Parlamentului Britanic că aplicația This is your digital life este numai vârful icebergului. A recunoscut că au existat
This is your digital life is only the tip of the iceberg. We know that there are other applications as well which use personal data. And obviously, I think the 87 million who've been affected, actually, there's a much bigger figure than that, as Claude was saying as well. Before the US Senate, Zuckerberg admitted that there was indeed a link between the data which was used by Cambridge Analytica and the Agency for Internet Security and the Kremlin. Data security in the European Union is certainly our responsibility, and we have to see whether the GDPR will be enough here. The data belongs to the citizens. It shouldn't be used by the Kremlin or anyone else in order to destroy our democracy.
Thank you. Mr. Peterson, 1 minute.
Ja, tak.
Yes, thank you very much. Have we gotten the wrong president in the White House? So we know that there has been fake news and misuse of Facebook data. Perhaps the Brexit vote might have been different in other cases. And it's really quite frightening to think about this. And we have to think about how to avoid these things in the future. These scandals have given us a lesson. We need common playing rules in the EU. For example, how can small countries get Mark Zuckerberg on board and talk to us? I think that we've taken the right step with these new European rules. The best solution to common problems are common, and we need to work in this way in the future so that we can truly protect our citizens when they're on the internet.
We have the wrong president. I thought that for a moment that you were referring to me, and I was scared. But Mrs. Sargentini, for 1 minute.
Dank u, voorzitter.
Thank you very much, President. In my paper, there is a ad that says that EU regulation allows for better protection for you, but that is so hypocritical. Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook has not protected anyone. The idea was to bring everybody together and not to make money off of this, but it is making money off of our data. And so we, with our legislation, can make sure that Mark Zuckerberg will have to come up with a new business model in the future. And it is excellent that we have this new regulation, but we don't have Facebook to thank for this.
Thank you. Mrs. Matias, 1 minute.
Obrigada, Presidente. Este não é debate sobre redes sociais.
Thank you, President. This is not a debate about social networks, but it's about freedom and democracy. We have a society, culture, economy based on information, but we are not protecting our data. In most cases, the protection of a private life in the digital arena has not been taken into account. Automatic software and algorithms are the new political battlefield. We are trying to analyze applications that we don't even properly understand. This software can use our data to analyze what we're doing, who we're in touch with, and who's trying to get in touch with us. And this is purely manipulation. We have to we have to understand that this is business being done by millionaires, and those with money continue to have access to power.
Mr. Nagy, 1 minute and 30 seconds.
You were leaving.
Köszönöm szépen. A magánélet tiszteletben tartása a fejlett társadalmak egy.
Thank you. Respecting private life is a huge achievement of developed societies, and the protection of personal data is one of our basic rights. That's why it's so crucial we introduce the necessary systems. We are maybe only faced with the tip of the iceberg here in this question of Facebook and Cambridge Analytica, but it's clear that we can't simply rely on the services if all we have is optional free data collection. In Slovakia, many thousands of people's data were manipulated in this case, and basically society is being hit in the soft belly as well through its votes. In Washington and also in the White House, it's been stressed that this system that we have in Europe, the data protection, is basically the minimum of what we can expect in the face of these people who handle so such huge volumes of data. Cambridge Analytica is trading in this data, and I am sure that there are places in the world where these types of companies are tolerated, but the service providers or the actual they're able to shove the responsibility onto other people, and the risk continues to increase. And so it's absolutely crucial that we should approve.
Thank you.
President, colleagues, when I opened my newspaper on Monday, I was amazed by a whole-page advert from Facebook. New EU legislation leads to better data protection for you. Well, wasn't it just a few days before that Mark Zuckerberg spoke before our American colleagues in the Congress, and he was less than convincing? I think that maybe it's quite hard to get a grasp on all that's going on. I think that Facebook and Cambridge Analytica will have really surprised quite a lot of people with all of the different issues involved, unfair competition and manipulation, etc. However, for a long time, Facebook has been using a lack of data protection precisely as a business model. 5 years ago, when we last worked on data protection, we found that we were dealing with a lot of rejection and lack of knowledge. Now, if my colleagues had told me back then that we could be setting global standards, I wouldn't have believed them. But recently, I read in the Washington Post that the future of Facebook would be decided in Europe. Well, what does that mean? It means that Europe is capable of acting, and it needs to have the will to act. Member states should stop trying to put sand in the wheels of our efforts to work on data protection. The e-privacy regulation, which is needed to conclude our work on this subject, but they should cease to blockade this file. The member states need to finally fully implement the General Data Protection Regulation.
1 minute.
Thank you so much. I believe that in this situation, all the parties, all the participants are trying to say the other one is guilty. Cambridge Analytica says Facebook is guilty. Facebook says Cambridge University is guilty. Then the university says it's actually Mr. Kogan who's guilty. And Mr. Hogan says it's basically the users. But I think that everyone is guilty in this particular case, because we are talking mainly about Facebook here, but the scale of this guilt and the problem varies. We know that Facebook, since 2016, has known about problematic activity conducted by Cambridge Analytica, and only now have they decided to conduct an audit. Others also turned a blind eye on what was the actual purpose of the so-called academic research. For instance, Cambridge Psychometric Center research never went through the procedure of approval of the University Ethics Committee. Also, the users were guilty because they opened the doors for the data related to their friends. So what we need is not only the analysis of the regulations for digital platforms, but also internal control over academic research. Thank you.
Doamna Joly, 1 minute.
Monsieur le Président.
President, on the 25th of May, the new European rules for data protection will come into force, accompanied by sanctions worthy of that name. Facebook and the other internet giants must understand that our consent to the collection of our data is non-negotiable, nor is our private life for sale. The Facebook boss should come and explain the situation to the European Parliament. Mark Zuckerberg owes more than mere excuses or vague announcements to us. He owes us guarantees with regard to the processing of our data and more transparency with regard to the origin of advertisements of political origin. Once again, it's thanks to Christopher Weil that it was possible, a whistleblower, that it was possible to inform the citizens. Once again, a former member of Cambridge Analytica revealed that the number of people whose data has been abused or misused is much higher. So let's protect personal data. Let's protect all those and all that makes our democracy breathe.
Thank you.
Tak for det. Det står nu klart, at DUP har gjort brug af et datamineringscompany, nemlig Analytica, under Brexit-kampagnen, og dermed har de misbrugt data hos millioner af Facebook-brugere. Vi har set det samme med Cambridge Analytica, og det var det samme selskab, som hjalp med at få Trump valgt, og fordi de er bosiddende i Canada, så ligger de ikke under for de samme love. Og man har fundet forbindelser mellem selskaberne og forbindelser mellem Toryerne og DUP og russiske oligarker.
This isn't the first time that the DUP has paid fast and loose with the law to pursue their dangerous pro-Brexit agenda. The DUP took almost £500,000 in dark money from a secret source to manipulate opinion in London, where they have 0 votes and 0 seats. And they then ensured transparency law that was not backdated to expose their CDDs. Chair, I just want to say that the DUP has no respect for rights, no respect for privacy, and absolutely no regard for the damage that their reckless Brexit agenda is doing in Ireland. Thank you.
Thank you. Doamna Reding, 1 minut și 30 de secunde.
Trust is a must. It takes years to build, but only seconds to lose. And sadly, tech giants learned this lesson the hard way. The latest example being Cambridge Analytica scandal. Unfortunately, we Europeans decided on the right laws to bring back trust. Because who wants to be part of a global community where algorithms know better than you what you are, than your family, than your friends, where someone can spy on you anywhere, at work, at home, on the streets, and where your political preferences can be matched to the highest bidder, where you are a product being sold without your consent. 9 in 10 Europeans want none of this. And that is exactly why we adopted the General Data Protection Regulation, to put citizens back in control of their own data, to ensure a stronger enforcement and high fines for companies which do not comply, to set data protection standards worldwide. 6 years ago, lobbyists and national governments tried to stop the proposal I had put on the table for a General Data Protection Regulation. And today they agree it is an indispensable piece of legislation. Because the internet was designed for the people and by the people, that is what it has to stay.
Everything in good time. Doamna Van Bremt, 1 minut și 30 de secunde.
Thank you, President. Now, the scandal that we're discussing today with regard to Cambridge Analytica and Facebook leads me to think of another scandal which we've already had to deal with, the Dieselgate scandal. Now, there are certain similarities. Major multinationals have undermined the trust of the Europeans and others throughout the world. And these powerful multinationals, well, we're talking about the data of millions of people, and billions are being earned. In 2006, we were the largest and the most powerful companies were oil companies. But now things have developed. Now we have the big 5, the big data and internet companies. And that's the point. I would like to make when directly pleading for e-privacy. I think that we should be proud of our own legislation, but we need to look at the broader picture. This is something which really has a considerable influence in terms of our society, but there are also companies who are not paying their tax, and that's another aspect to bear in mind in this scandal.
Luque, 1 minute.
Mr. Luque, 1 minute. President, ladies and gentlemen, the scandal we're discussing here today has sent shockwaves around the world, but still not enough citizens are aware of how extensively their data is used by social media giants and internet companies and what is being done with their data. We need to take action here. We need to make it crystal clear to citizens the extent to which their data is being used, the volume of data on individuals, on users, that has been harvested. We can only do so if we require internet companies, social media companies, to inform their citizens or their users regularly on the extent of data storage. It must be par for course that users are made aware of the type of information harvested and stored by companies, their data, and they must be aware of how this data is used and how it might be repackaged and sold on. Let's see action instead of words.
Domnul Giegold, 1 minute.
Mr. Giegold, for 1 minute. Colleagues, President, at the moment, more than 2 billion people use Facebook around the world, 400 million in Europe. This company has become a global communications platform for providing information, even political campaigning. So, Facebook is the infrastructure of the modern public sphere in a democracy. And like all forms of infrastructure, anyone that builds the infrastructure and defines the rules for it has power over who profits from that infrastructure. When it's the state that builds a road, the state ensures that all cars have an equal right to drive on it. If it's Facebook that sets the algorithms, it often decides that certain content should get more attention than others. So, colleagues, in an information society, knowledge is power. And in an algorithmic digital society, the digital infrastructure is power. Whoever owns the infrastructure can determine who benefits. A democratic society has to set the rules upon which that society functions and that infrastructure is used. We need a digital supervisor that's similar to the European banking supervisor. Madam Commissioner, you could put forward a proposal like that and give citizens back control.
A second. It's not here. Doamna Schaldemose.
Mrs. Schaldemose.
1 minute.
Thank you. In many ways, Facebook is a fantastic social network where you can keep in touch with your family and friends and old colleagues. But Facebook is also a huge enterprise with a business model that really challenges our societies. When you don't pay for using Facebook, it's because you pay in a different currency. When it comes to Facebook, you are the product and the currency is your personal data. Today, Facebook is so big that it's not just a problem for our privacy, it's also a huge challenge to our democracy. Data is gathered to an extent that even the result of a parliamentary election can be predicted. Our societies and our democracies are suffering from this kind of business model, and the EU needs to fight the monopoly and the position that Facebook has gotten in the market to protect the users' data, but also to protect our democracy.
Domnul Van Dalen, 1 minute.
President, now borders here are important, and that's why we've got to be very careful about the protection of private data. Now, Facebook is already under fire, and we know that Cambridge Analytica collect information of people who gave their consent, but also friends there of these individuals who knew nothing about this. In the Netherlands, it transpired last week that institutes dealing with care had used Facebook data. That's why I'm very pleased that there is EU legislation coming into force so that data can only be used with the consent of the individuals concerned. It is essential that all of this be enforced by the EU and by the Netherlands. Now, I think that the Commission should not adopt an arrogant a threat and should come up with a new procedure for the appointment of the new Secretary General.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One aspect I'm missing so far in this debate is that the Facebook scandal is also a scandal of secrecy. We must demand more transparency about data breaches on the one hand, but more generally about how personalized algorithms work and who is served which customized messages on whose behalf. In a world where information flows are now so personalized that we no longer really have one shared reality, we must make it understandable and investigable how information is spread and who is spreading it. As we debate regulatory responses to the scandal, here's my proposal. Let us regulate advertising targeting. There is an arms race in the industry to collect ever more data, to create ever more precise psychological profiles of users, and to move ever closer to outright manipulation, just to secure advertising revenues. Let's end this arms race and return a share of the advertising market to those whose business model is not based on invading our privacy. Thank you.
Thank you. Truth is that we are consumers either of commercial things or politics. So therefore, you know, we have to buy it. Diaz de Mera, 1 minute and 30 seconds.
President, data mining and misuse thereof is having an impact on elections. Massive storage of private information on voters, spreading of fake news, these are all problems. Measures must be taken to put a stop to misappropriation of our data and the spread of fake news. This isn't about undermining freedom of expression, but ensuring rather responsible use of the media to avoid manipulation. If the Commission doesn't take action, then Member States should take the legislative initiative under Articles 74 and 76 of the Treaty on the European Union. This misappropriation, misuse, is a threat to democracy and our security. Public bodies should coordinate to prevent incidents such as those we denounce here today. We need to strengthen any investigations. The cyber security package was adopted last September, and that's a step in the right direction. We need a European agency on cyber security. We need it imbued with sufficient resources to be effective. And we also need Europol to get involved. We also need a system on dispute settlement. We need proper use of resources. These steps are all needed to prevent a recurrence of the Cambridge Analytica Facebook case. My dear colleagues, there is a Europol report also that talks about this threat.
Grazie, signor Presidente, colleghi.
President, colleagues, now the case of Cambridge Analytica and Facebook shows that public opinion is increasingly influenced by the sponsoring of news on the net, and that news can be more or less false. And this can favour political parties and trends and manipulate the vote. This happened in Europe. Cambridge Analytica was involved in the British referendum, in the French election campaign, and in the recent Italian elections. despite our efforts, with just fairly good results of their clients. Now, here we must be careful. We're talking about a very important issue here for Europe. We're talking about the future of Europe. So this is why we need the proper measures to be taken so that platforms are more responsible, so that we can check the truth of accounts and ensure transparency of data transactions. The next European elections are imminent. Let's not leave a free area for people who are illicitly using our data and have created different forms of consent.
From our colleague over there. SOŚNIERZ, over there. Do you accept it? Yes. Yeah, okay. So, here you are.
Now, President, on this new legislation, what are your ideas? How could that be solved in a legislative fashion? Now, the problem is, if you issue a new act of law, the data could still be offered. There will always be villains out there who will break any laws. Now, surveillance of the state in the internet is even more dangerous than surveillance by private companies, because private companies have no army or police at their disposal, contrary to the state. So the state is more dangerous than Facebook in this particular regard. So this is my fair warning to you. You should not interfere in the liberties of the internet.
Thank you very much for that question. And this allows me to expand a little bit on a point which I made earlier on. I think that we need greater responsibility for platforms. Platforms have always been considered to be mere intermediaries, but they are responsible. They must check who the people are behind accounts, or very often false identities or computers which generate false news and spread false news in the internet. We need to know who's paying and who's buying data on platforms. Here there's a protection of the rights of the individuals, even if there is state control.
We need to accept Facebook only if it is linked to typewriters. So this would be probably.
Protuzakonito stjecanje podataka I invazija privatnosti.
Thank you very much. Now, illegal use of data is a challenge for our time. With better legislation and better awareness raising among citizens, we have to deal with this problem. Now, 71% of households use these kind of sites regularly. In many cases, they're unaware of what they are doing and expose themselves to dangerous predators on the web. We need to do everything possible as legislators to reduce this risk. But we need to stop lying to ourselves. Brexit and other recent events are not caused by Facebook. It's because citizens need to be more aware. We should not be trying to censor any political players, because that would damage our democracy much more than the unfair practices that we're trying to prevent.
Cato.
Thank you very much, President. As Democrats, we need to recognise the true seriousness of this situation. Our democracies are being stolen by companies who use psychological techniques designed for situations of military conflict to sow division in our societies and distort electoral outcomes to the benefit of the rich and powerful. Those who think that the naive arguments for freedom of speech are sufficient imagine the media landscape as a fairy tale world of Hansel and Gretel, but the Cambridge Analytica scandal shows us that the forest is full of wolves. For many online today, the distinction between fake news and genuine news is increasingly blurred, and this plays into the hands of those who wish to consolidate power. As Hannah Arendt said, the ideal subject of totalitarian rule is not the convinced Nazi or the convinced communist, but people for whom the distinction between fact and fiction and the distinction between true and false no longer exists.
Mulțumim. Domnul Lenaers, 1 minut și 30 de secunde.
Dank u, voorzitter.
Thank you, President. Facebook is a fan of the EU data protection legislation. Miracles never cease to amaze us. But yet, so many people have been abused by Cambridge Analytica, their data, and that data has been used in political campaigns without people having given their consent and without them even being aware of the situation. Facebook was aware of the situation but didn't say anything for a couple of years. And I then wanted to see what the reaction of Facebook was even 6 years ago, and they said
practices by companies like Facebook rather than on setting out detailed rules that may be frustrating and costly. Overly prescriptive provisions on consent have an adverse effect on user experience. Overly prescriptive nature of regulation on data breach notification creates a level of bureaucracy that only distracts. Dat is Facebook's.
That's Facebook as we know it. They just simply want to make money and they don't worry about rules and regulations. But now Mark Zuckerberg placed a big ad in the European papers where he's pleading in favor of these rules. And we have to believe in his blue-eye gaze. But I would say too little, too late. Mark Zuckerberg must come here to the EU and report to this House. And I hope that the European supervisors will ensure that the new rules which Facebook is suddenly so fond of, will actually be implemented by Facebook immediately.
Doamna Dali, 1 minut.
Grazie, President.
Thank you, Chair. If anyone ever had doubts about the safety of our data online, it has now been confirmed that there are companies that are gathering and selling our information to different organizations. In my country, Malta, 90% of the Maltese people use social media. Of these, 6,000 were targeted. Around 2.7 million citizens in Europe were victims of this. Therefore, we ask the Commission and the Commissioner to be firm and to ask for clear and direct answers from Facebook and Cambridge Analytica. The General Data Protection Regulation is all well and good, but it does not go far enough in such a case, since we are dealing with the protection of personal communication and online privacy. For such cases, we should have the e-privacy regulation. I appeal to the Council and the Member States. This is an urgent matter. Do not agree to a weak position that only benefits big businesses. It is your responsibility to keep this regulation strong for the benefit of citizens that you represent and need to protect. Thank you.
Domnul Coelho, 1 minut și jumătate.
Thank you very much, President. Mass data may be the oil of the 21st century, but there's a difference between the black gold of the last century and the information we exchange online today. When we're talking about data protection and privacy, we're not talking about a commodity. We're talking about a fundamental right of European citizens, a right that's protected by the Charter of Fundamental Rights and by the constitutions of many member states. The criminal access by Cambridge Analytica to the data of private Facebook users is an attack on the fundamental right of European citizens who have seen their privacy violated. In each of these 3 million cases in Europe, this is already a crime, but it's even more serious if we take into account the potential consequences. 1.5 million British citizens' data was violated as part of the Brexit campaign, and that was is similar to the margin of votes that the Leave campaign won by. I think it's hard not to be worried. If one of the biggest decisions of European integration in the last few decades was influenced by a crime, then I think that there are consequences. This is an attack on this rule of law. Facebook has to explain itself to this Parliament, and I think that we need to reinforce this with the entry into force of the General Data Protection Regulation.
Card from our colleague, Mrs. Jaakonsaari. Yes, Mrs. Jaakonsaari, you have the floor.
Mr. President, it is a good thing that the European Parliament is having such a consensus on this issue, and I am particularly pleased on our Commissioner, Mrs. Jourová, who mentioned algorithms as one part of spreading fake news. I would like to put a question to you. Are you ready to add openness in algorithms, because these are under business secrecy, and of course there the hard business faces the interests of our citizens?
Yes, thank you very much for the question you asked. Well, let's be clear. We can't go back to the last century. It is clear that information is power. Information with rules can be a business, and I'm not against that. What I'm against is the use of personal data without these persons' approval. Each of us owns our own data. That is important. That needs to be safeguarded. We've got European legislation that's going to enter into force. Everyone who's active on the European market has to fulfill this legislation.
Doamna Costa, un minut.
Grazie, Presidente.
Thank you, President. The Facebook Analytica case reveals the following. First of all, that business models which are parasites and invasive are not acceptable. They're based on personal data which is sold to advertisement and other companies. Could I remind you that 200,000 Italian names are being dealt with? The authority in Italy to protect privacy have been apprised of this situation. We have good digital legislation, and we're proud of that, but we need legislation on privacy. We need to be bolder in defining the responsibility of social platforms, particularly with regard to hate speech, instigation to suicide, bullying, and all the abuse of power, the abuse of the dominant positions which we see in other spheres. And the third point to be made is that we need more cooperation among the European authorities so that we will be able to ensure better protection, and we need a greater and more integrated approach. Thank you.
Scandal Cambridge Analytica.
Thank you, President. The Cambridge Analytica and Facebook scandal might be a lesson in failure and loss of reputation, or it could be turned into an opportunity. What do I mean by opportunity? Never before have we talked so much about the need to protect our privacy on the internet. It is important for everyone. It means that we have to be responsible for managing our own data. 3 million of Europeans are facing an unprecedented situation. Never before have we talked with so much respect about the achievement of GDPR, which harmonizes the rules on privacy protection, which also gives us, the users, a key instrument to protect ourselves, to give or not to give consent to process our data. Of course, the way these rules are going to be implemented, it can only be evaluated in a couple of months. In other words, we are starting to talk about our European privacy legislation as a point of reference for the whole world. We can now tackle the advertising on the internet, especially if it borders on politics. We do not need to put internet in the center of political power games, especially if it involves possible manipulations in elections. In other words, we can now demand online platforms to be more transparent and more responsibility in terms of content, in terms of managing data, in terms of tracking. So this is an opportunity. It might enhance our trust on the internet, provided that everything we talk about today is going to be implemented 100%.
Mr. Boni, there is a blue card question for you. Will you accept it? Mr. Boni, do you accept that blue card question? Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you, Mr. Boney, a good colleague and friend on the data debate. What I want to ask...
Yeah. Madame Soana, elle est partie.
I think it was Mrs. Zoana.
I'd ask for the floor.
Vous attendez une minute. C'est elle? Oui. Madame Zoana.
Mrs. Zoana.
Si vous pouvez nous accorder un peu d'attention, vous avez...
Catch the eye, I believe.
OK. Alors, catch the eye, c'est pas en secouant le carton bleu de là-haut.
No, it's a blue card, not catch the eye.
So can I continue, Madam President?
Alors maintenant, c'est à vous.
Merci beaucoup. Mr. Boney, you said about how this is an opportunity as well. Obviously, we are horrified with what's happened with Cambridge Analytica and Facebook, and being a British MEP in the aftermath of Brexit and what this means, we'll be looking into. But you said something important about how we can look at our personal responsibility. And one of the things that I've been working on with public libraries is the role public libraries can have in helping our citizens know about how to protect their own personal data. The work of the Carnegie Trust in this, I draw attention to the House on this. So, Mr. Boney, would you agree with me that public libraries can provide us with a tool, a neutral public space where we can get people to understand about their privacy and about their data? Thank you.
Thank you very much for your question. I do think that the GDPR implementation is a huge opportunity for us to learn how to manage our own data. We need to become more aware of this responsibility, because we keep saying, yes, we can give consent and this will solve the problem. Not at all. This is not going to be as easy as that. We need to really enhance our capacity to understand what we can lose or what we can gain if we give our consent or not. And this is also a big role for the libraries. Yes, I do agree with you. It is a chance also for them.
Mr.
Nika, 1 minute.
Doamna comisar, astăzi știm că sunt 2.
Thank you, President. Commissioner, now we know that we're talking about 2.6 million citizens whose data was used in an illicit fashion. But this is only the tip of the iceberg, and that is quite clear. This is the data which was only used by Cambridge Analytica, one company only. So we have to investigate to see whether we're talking about the data of many other citizens. And then we have the data which was collected of individuals who are not Facebook users. So I think that the Commission should investigate and report back to citizens and say whether or not their information, their private data, has been used in an illegal fashion and whether the data has been stored. Elections must be fair elections and reliable. The European election results must be reliable too. Now, I really wonder what happened with the elections in my own country in 2014. I want to be sure of the fact that we're not going to fall into the same trap for the next election. Thank you.
Mr. Becker, 1.5 minutes. President, Commissioner, here in the European Parliament, I take the opportunity to address Mr. Zuckerberg. In principle, Facebook is very positive development, but it has ended up causing major difficulties for people in Europe and right around the world. Hate speech, terrorism, you haven't been responsible in your dealings in the way you've dealt with these issues in the past. We've also seen now misuse. Clearly, Mr. Zuckerberg, you are now duty-bound to take action, and we as politicians must protect the interests of millions of citizens that may be the victims of targeted campaigns. They themselves are not aware of the background. You have the psychological profile of these people, and to a detail that these people themselves are not even aware of. There are huge risks that may amount to election manipulation. European Parliament elections will take place next year, and there is a real risk. If Facebook gives access to Cambridge Analytica, then perhaps the Russian propagandists will be able to misuse data in a similar fashion. So come here to the European Parliament, answer our questions, and do so now. Mr. Zorrinho, 1 minute.
The abusive use of data by Facebooks requires a strong response in regulatory terms and in ethical terms. Collection and use of data shows that precisely that the European Union is at its best when it preempts. When we're pioneers, then we can have a relevant voice in digital globalization. We need to invest in technology whilst stressing our values, our own digital identity, which should be ethical, fair and reliable. Standing out through our values is something that we have to put into our legal and technological solutions. That's the way that we should deal with the challenges we face. Protecting citizens' rights and democratic transparency is part of our shared values. The EU can and must ensure that platforms on the European market include in their business models and algorithms the shared values that structure the European digital identity. We need political and technological solutions that are convincing. It's time to assert a European digital identity. Thank you very much, Madam President.
Thank you, Mr. Didier. 1.5 minutes.
With more than 2 billion people who have enrolled, Facebook is a database, the largest which has ever existed. And the current situation is quite clear. Our private life, our personal data, our virtual intimacy, it no longer belongs to us. They have become de facto the property of a few companies who are exploiting the data for commercial purposes. We're not mere consumers. We've become products which are up for sale. Now, I've informed the European Commission. I've asked for financial sanctions to be applied to Cambridge Analytica and Facebook. I realize that the new legislation on the protection of personal data is a first step in the right direction. It is a necessary step, but it is not sufficient, which is why I propose that we go further than that and that we demand of these platforms that they should no longer be able to use our data for commercial purposes. These platforms should not be able to even collect, store or preserve for a long period the personal data. Platforms are vehicles. That's the way they function. But there's no reason for them to become the users, let alone the owners of the data. I would propose to ourselves that we already today decide on our own personal borders, because tomorrow it will be too late.
Mr. Guoga, 1.5 minutes.
News in this situation that we have implemented GDPR and we are going to be leading the world forward in protecting people's rights, fundamental rights, their data, their privacy. Facebook has failed us miserably. They failed the whole world miserably. And we need to bring in Mark Zuckerberg here at the European Parliament to answer very serious questions as soon as possible. We're worried what happened with the Brexit. Was it Facebook's fault? I mean, these are very important questions to be urgently answered by Facebook. Cambridge Analytica and perhaps others are cooperating and using our data to work against our interests. This is very important, so we should be very stringent. We should keep analysing and doing everything we can to stop fake news and to stop leakage of our data for fake news to be empowered, to change election results and to destroy our democracy. Let's be vigilant, let's be brave, and let's make this happen.
Merci. Thank you. You had 1.5 minutes. Now, Mr. Mello, 1.5 minutes too.
Well, Facebook is not only an American company, it's on the world market, and thousands and thousands, if not millions, of those users are Europeans. It's a global company, and to that extent, Mark Zuckerberg shouldn't only be explaining himself to the American Congress, he also owes an explanation to the European Parliament. Well, to say that everyone who can get access to Facebook if they want is a ridiculous argument. Facebook, of course, it hasn't got any real competition. There's no real alternative to Facebook. It would be like saying you only have to have electricity in your house if you want it. So I think that it's inevitable that there needs to be attention paid to these platforms in future. This is serious, and a simple apology is not enough. Manipulation of personal data to try and obtain political objectives without conscious and aware consent from the people being targeted is not acceptable in a democratic society under the rule of law. The use of 87 million users' data from Facebook, and not only Facebook uses data for influencing electoral campaigns across the world. Well, this is something that simply cannot happen. It should not be allowed to happen in the USA. It should not be allowed to happen here in Europe. And we are politicians. We are going to have elections in 2019, and we need to be in the front line in ensuring that this situation is not repeated. Thank you.
Madame Corazza-Bildt.
Mrs. Corazza-Bildt, 1 minute and a half.
Madame la Présidente, great commercial power must come with great responsibility, since platforms like Facebook deal with people, not goods. In Europe, we stand up for the highest standards of civil liberties. Access and use of personal data must be transparent and follow our privacy rules. Red lines are crossed when it affects our democracy, influencing elections, spreading fake news. And time has come for platforms to take responsibility for the content published by users, in particular concerning children, privacy and safety. As Facebook and Google Child Summit is underway right now, as a co-chair of the Intergroup on Child Rights, I reiterate my call to the ICT community to invest more in finding innovative solutions to protect children online. I welcome the new measures on parental control, but to be effective, age verification tools must be put in place. Much is done to combat child sexual abuse online, but much more needs to be done. An entire generation of young people is affected by hate speech and cyberbullying. A girl victim of revenge pornography or sex extortion must be able to put her pictures out. These crimes can lead children to commit self-harm and suicide. Much more needs to be done also urgently to prevent young people to be radicalized and recruited by terrorists on social media. I call on platforms to strengthen reporting of abuse, speed up removal of illegal content, and increase cooperation with law enforcement authorities. Madam Chair, I support President Tajani's call to Mark Zuckerberg for a hearing with the European Parliament to tell us what Facebook is up to. Thank you.
Madame Jourová, pour 1 minute.
Thank you. Minute and a half, Mrs. Jourová.
Merci Madame Présidente. J'ai ici noté 1 minute and half. Alors, merci. Otázka úniku osobních dat z Facebooku.
The issue of the data leak in Facebook might ironically help people to watch out, and they have realized that they have much greater responsibility for their data, not just them personally, but also their governments and the European Union. The social networks have a large impact on the mindset of people, so there is a risk for our democracy and our free decisions. I think it is a serious problem to misuse our data for misinformation campaigns of Russia and other states, which have an influence of the decisions of voters in the EU and elsewhere. This must not be taken lightly. We have to reinforce institutions of the EU which deal with this issue. For example, Stratcom, with their budget of €1.5 million and with a small team, can't face all this misinformation industry supported by Russia. Therefore, I'm very grateful that President Tajani invited Mark Zuckerberg to the European Parliament. He should speak here and he should tell us what he did against this data misuse, how he prevented this from happening again. Europeans have more Facebook accounts than the USA, so it is convenient for him to explain himself to us. It is also a right thing that you communicate with Facebook, Madam Commissioner, and you try to make them feel their responsibility and take measures. Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you. I will now move on to Catch the Eye. I have a long list, so I would urge you to stick to your speaking time. Mr. Kelly first.
Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak, as I was the EPP rapporteur for the Data Protection Regulation, working on it for 3 years, and it's now coming into operation on May 25th. And indeed, in some respects, this scandal is timely because it brings people's attention to it. Secondly, 2 weeks ago I was part of a 7-strong ITRE committee delegation to the Silicon Valley, where Facebook met us at short notice and we discussed this very topic, and they outlined to us what happened and what they are doing to ensure that such a scandal won't happen in the future. We also reiterated President Tajani's request to them for their CEO, Mark Zuckerberg, to come to the European Parliament. And I think he should come, if only for the fact that they have 50% more clients in Europe than in the USA. 364 million in Europe, 239 in the USA, plus Canada. And also to show us what they're doing regarding apps, algorithms, authentication, an independent commission, etc. Finally, I just want to say their headquarters in Europe are in Ireland, and the government in Ireland are giving far more resources to ensure that GDPR will be properly monitored in the European Union. Thank you very much.
Monsieur López Aguilar.
Mr. López Aguilar.
President, Commissioner, the very first day the whole scandal came out, the European Data Protection Supervisor told us, to the LIBE Committee members, it's much bigger than you know, and it was. It's about fundamental rights, privacy awareness, but privacy enforcement as well, namely the right to be forgotten, enshrined by the GDPR. But it's also about democracy, because fake news is a hybrid war of intoxication, manipulation, lies and hate speech aimed to weaken democracy through interfering in elections and enhancing populism and Europhobia. So it takes a response. European, which means that no member state can do it on its own before a giant in the internet like Facebook, but also legal, binding and effective law. But it takes action. That means that doing nothing is not a choice. That is what the European citizens are expecting from all of us, and that is precisely and exactly what we ask from you. The European Commission must take initiative, action, and now.
Mr. Telička.
Mr. Telička.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think there is a high degree of consensus in this House, which is rare, but I think that the issue requires that to be the case. I think that clearly there are systemic issues, for sure, related to data protection. Clearly, there are criminal issues, clearly as concerns Facebook ethical, but also a question of business model. But one element, while it has been mentioned, did not dominate today's debate, and I think it is absolutely crucial, because the very fundamentals of our democracy might have been affected, and that is the engagement, the intervention into elections throughout, most likely, EU member states. And this is, I would say, serious. This is something that we need to know more about. I want to know more about who were the clients, what was really the business entailed, and if we all want to know that, then I think that we need to take measures that we do find out, as sensitive and explosive as it may be. Thank you.
Madame Miranda.
Mrs. Miranda.
Obrigada, Presidente.
Thank you very much, President. Where, when, with who are you talking to? What are you thinking? Everything that you do is known to Facebook. Technology is not neutral. It controls, it manipulates, it spies on the backstage of the world and our social relations. The transfer of data from Facebook to Cambridge Analytica is not simply something that can be apologized for by Facebook. It compromises democracy, it compromises our fundamental right to privacy and to ownership of our data, particularly when there's a question of propaganda and electoral manipulation. The Palestinian and Kurdish people have been affected when Facebook has closed portals and users. So I think it's very important that we should manage this. Global capitalism is in charge of all this, and this is intervention in our democracies. We should not be silent.
Thank you, Chairman. Chair. I think that we've heard a very good diagnosis of the situation, so I'm not going to repeat it. Now, let's see what we can do. There are lots of millions of fake profiles, and they need to be abolished. I think it's the easiest thing to do. You cannot have all of these fake profiles. Second, you should be able to delete our account immediately and be certain that nothing is left over in any kind of records. Thirdly, should be able to delete a post and be certain that nothing is left of it. And finally, I'm really surprised by the discussion today. Is it only today that we have found out about this? Of course, things now have gone beyond our wildest imagination. However, the law is there, it is in place, and I think we can control the social networks. Thank you very much.
Mr. Epitipheos.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Μία από τις σημαντικές παρενέργειες.
One of the most important side effects of digital technology is that it can affect the privacy of people online and their human rights. The Cambridge Analytica scandal has proved that users' data can be used for financial and political purposes. And the situation becomes even more serious when these data fall into the hands of secret services or terrorists. I would like to remind you that a couple of years ago, CIA officially thanked the users of Facebook because through their posts they had provided an amount of data that they couldn't have collected on their own. Of course, the member states are trying to protect their citizens. However, we ourselves should be also careful with our posts and with our personal data. Thank you very much.
Now, to make it clear, I am both a user of Facebook and a Twitter user. These are the technological solutions that we all use. However, these are also tools one might think that they only used for our benefit. However, they're also used for the purpose of surveillance. I'm not very convinced that we could actually protect our personal data by legal means. Does it mean that we should actually throw in the towel? Not really. What is important for me, because there are some people who have some sort of a naivete, who are looking for the benefits on the internet only. For me, is to make sure that we know what the priorities are. Physical safety, security of our children, and also the safety of legal institutions such as elections. These are the values that we need to protect.
Thank you, President. After the Cambridge Analytica scandal, the American Congress heard the CEO of Facebook, and we must acknowledge the fact that the American administration dealt with the Cambridge Analytica in a very serious manner and following an emergency procedure. But of course we have to establish a new link between these media and the legislator. And we have to venture forth onto areas which were often considered not to be dealt with. In Europe, we have struck the right balance. We've managed to protect data and yet protect entrepreneurs. And in less than a month's time, the new GDPR will come into force, the new regulation, which is the result of years of work and compromise. And it should provide transparency and a clear control of personal data of all citizens. But if Europe is paving the way for the future of privacy on the internet, it is essential and appropriate for Facebook to report back to this Parliament, to the European Parliament, And if it were to be ascertained that there's been interference in elections, Facebook should also report to the governments concerned. Thank you.
Monsieur Scholtes.
Hvala za besedo. Seveda gre za velik škandal, za hudo zlorabo podatkov.
This is a huge scandal, the misuse of data. But Facebook is merely the tip of the iceberg. Pandora's box has been opened now, and the repercussions will be huge. We see the real impact that this media can have, the way it can sway democratic processes, create a type of virtual democracy, and we are left gobsmacked. So we need to take action. That is why it is very important that we now have the new General Data Protection Regulation. But the regulation alone will not change business models or the way in which companies behave. We also need appropriate sanctions to apply, and we need to take action here. Thank you.
Mr. Flanagan.
Mr. Flanagan.
The bottom line is Facebook or any similar company should not be able to sell our data. GDPR is an excellent start. I think an area like this is a perfect example of where European countries in the European Union should work very closely together, more so than concentrating on creating a European army. Areas like this and food sovereignty are exactly what we should be doing. And when it comes to accountability, given the amount of customers, or who's the customer here, we're the product obviously, we need Mr. Zuckerberg to come before the relevant committees and to answer questions. There are many, many positives to Facebook. And when I think of Facebook, I think of it as a tool for democracy. I wouldn't be here but for it. I wouldn't have got canvassers together but for it. My work here would not be covered in my country but for Facebook, because I and many others are ignored by our national broadcaster. Many positives. We need to focus on them, but we need to solve this big problem too. Thank you.
La parole est à Monsieur Haworth.
Mr. Haworth.
Madam President, I share the disgust of the public at the abuses by Cambridge Analytica and the false propaganda that was peddled during the 2016 referendum. And I also share the disgust that many of these organisations exempt themselves for tax. And there is a clear need for an inquiry in this place, and I support that call. But looking forward, it's all very easy for politicians to bash the likes of Facebook, but the reality is we need new regulations and a new mindset of the type Mr. Giegold alluded to earlier. This is about people's daily lives and their ability to shop, to go to the bank, to interact and to play. And as governments force people to do things like put their tax returns online, we need to recognise that cyberspace is public space. It isn't a techie elite anymore, and public space needs regulation of behaviour in that space. It will not do simply to say that is too difficult. We need serious legislation that looks to the future.
Madame Soana.
Trăim într-o lume în care socializarea a devenit un must. Auzim deseori.
Thank you very much. We're living in a world where social media are a must. You have to have Facebook. And that's been shown again and again. E-commerce has got data on millions and millions of users. I'm a Facebook user. Many of my colleagues in this room are almost certainly Facebook users. It's not a bad thing in itself, but we have to be sure that our data is being used appropriately. Well, I'm impatient to see Mark Zuckerberg come here and respond to our questions, explain to us how our data is being used through Facebook. How has this worked in the relationship with Cambridge Analytica? We want to get answers. He's already done that for the American Congress. So Europeans are being endangered in this manner. Mr. Zuckerberg has to understand that we need light to be shed on this. He has a duty to explain himself not just to the American people but also to Europeans. Europeans are also users, and
Catch the eye, c'est 1 minute. Je suis désolée.
You have just 1 minute under catch the eye. I can't give you a minute and a half. Mrs. Gomes.
Com este escândalo,
with this scandal, citizens are realizing the risks of the digital dependence of the economy and Facebook, big data, artificial intelligence. Fundamental rights are at stake, our elections, our fundamental infrastructure. So the GDPR has to enter into force rapidly, it has to have global reach, and we have to ensure that we have e-privacy. Facebook, Cambridge Analytica, they are using algorithms and data for the most sinister purposes. They've got Chinese and Russian competitors, and it's important that we should break monopolies. We should try and prevent our citizens and democracies being exploited. Targeted ads and things like that. It's more than just a European initiative. It's a question of saving democracy and humanity in the global era. The Commission needs to act, and act now. Thank you.
Madame Grappini.
Mrs. Grappini.
Sur la liste, Madame Grappini.
You were on the list, Mrs. Grappini.
mulțumesc, doamna președintă, doamna comisar.
Thank you, President. Commissioner, it is a good thing that we are talking about this topic today. We need a realistic approach. No one person can solve the problems here. The Commission alone, national authorities, citizens alone cannot resolve this dilemma. What do we expect of the Facebook CEO? Well, he said at the US Congress that he set up Facebook, and we do live in a digital world. Now, we have a single market and we need to ensure product safety, so why don't we also impose rules on these internet giants to ensure that they don't sell on our personal data, or if that does happen, there must be a way to require them to comply with ethical rules. This is democracy and a danger to democracy.
Vă mulțumesc, doamnă președinte. Sunt inginer IT și am cerut în...
Thank you very much. I'm an IT engineer by profession, and within our group I have called for the creation of a special committee. I didn't manage to get that, but we have been able to get an invitation for Mr. Zuckerberg. He has to come and explain himself. What I saw with Facebook was that there were 50 different applications that had access to my data. I've deleted all of these now, but Facebook has now announced that maybe the company has already passed my data further. So I want to know what they have passed on. I want to have my data deleted from their databases. But this has to happen before May, before the GDPR is implemented. Maybe from that point onwards we should be able to assert our right to be forgotten as well. We need to get a list of the companies that have deleted their data. We need to know what Facebook has done. We need to know what Cambridge Analytica has done. And we need to understand what has been done in a legal manner.
Thank you very much. That was the end of the Catch of the Eye. And we pass it over now to the Commission.
And honourable members, I think that this debate clearly showed that we are on the same page with the conviction that we do not want to have this in Europe. We do not want to continue such practices or let continue such practices, and we have the obligation to do everything possible to stop such practices which we see in this Facebook Cambridge Analytica scandal. We don't want Europeans to be easy to manipulate crowd. We want the Europeans to be people who are responsible in regard to their private data and who deserve protection. And I myself cancelled my Facebook account 2 years ago. Somebody or many people, my PR advisors, told me, as a politician, you will be dead without Facebook. I'm still quite alive. But there are many people in this hall and also in the audience, I'm sure the young people who are here, they are in majority on Facebook. And again, it's our obligation to protect them and also to invite them to protect themselves, to understand why GDPR is here and what are the new rights which they will enjoy after 25th of May. I want to say a few words on how our work on this matter will continue now. We will have several inputs for continuation of the work. One thing is that we will do the analysis of where we are with electoral law in the member states. In other words, whether our member states are equipped in their legislation against aggressive marketing method, targeted marketing, which abuses the access to private data of people. I am absolutely convinced that to do the marketing based on illegal practice, on abused or stolen data, must be illegal. But we have to check where we are and whether in all the member states the authorities are able to enforce the ban of such practice. We do not know yet. Another input will be the result of the investigations which are ongoing in Ireland and in UK. There might be some other states launching the investigations later if it will be revealed that this practice was used in more member states. And of course, a very important input will be how the people will approach this, whether the affected Europeans will raise voice and whether they will be clear about we do not want to be objects of manipulation. I expect quite interesting debate not only in the European Union but also in the United States, because if this case should be good for something, it would be opening eyes of Americans as well, who are more relaxed about their privacy than Europeans. Another input for our continued work on this could be the opinion of the heads of states, because it might be put on their tables on the May European Council. I think it's not decided yet, but I think that this is such a big matter that the heads of states will want to discuss this. Based on these inputs, the Commission will reflect on this case in the coming communication on fake news. And here I will spoil everyone who thinks that we will come with some kind of censorship. This is not what the Commission is planning. We want to come with workable solutions to fight against the disinformation in the EU, and I am sure that it is very appropriate thing to include some lesson learned from this scandal into this paper. We will reflect on this case in the Digital Single Market report, which will come also, I think, in May. We will deal with the issue of algorithms in the communication focused on artificial intelligence, also to be adopted in spring this year. And of course, we will take this lesson for the continued negotiations on e-privacy. So this is the work ahead of us. I will be, of course, fully available for continued debate with you in the European Parliament. And let me thank you to conclude for very interesting debate, many good inspirations. We will work with it, and I'm looking forward for the new or additional future debate on this Facebook case or other things related to digital sphere. Thank you.
Merci, Madame. Thank you. I would now pass the floor over to Minister Panayotova for the Council.
Je vous remercie, Madame la Présidente. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like, first of all, to respond on the remarks and made and questions raised by the honourable members during this live debate. So, regarding the remarks made by Ms. Rodriguez, Mr. Albrecht and Mr. Moraes concerning the e-privacy, I would like to say that this is a priority file for the Council, as this is one of the key initiatives for enhancing trust and security in the digital single market. So the Council supports its objective to ensure a high level of protection of privacy of electronic communication, and we have been working intensively in order to ensure solid progress on the file. Considering the political and technical complexity of this file and the fact that it takes form of a directly applicable regulation, it is clear that adequate time is needed for a detailed analysis of all implications, keeping in mind the overall timeline for the adoption of the digital single market files. The Bulgarian presidency is firmly committed to advancing the work towards a Council negotiating position with the view to starting the trialogues with you, with the Parliament. Concerning the accent put by Mr. Diaz de Mera on the Security Act and on ENISA in particular, I would like to say that we are continuing our work on the draft Cybersecurity Act. We are confident that we will be able to deliver on our promise to achieve a general approach in the Council in June and to start the first trialogues in close cooperation with our colleagues from and trio partner from Austria. So we are continuing our support to advance all aspects of the file in parallel so that we can ensure the legal and business continuity of ENISA before expiration of its current mandate in 2020. In conclusion, I would like to say that the Facebook and the Cambridge Analytica case is important from the viewpoint of the data protection, as well as the fundamental issues like the rule of law and the democratic process. We must develop democratic resilience, media literacy, tolerance and critical thinking, and this is key for fighting of propaganda and manipulation through fake news, which threaten the very foundation of our societies. That's why I would like also to congratulate the Commission on the important step in this regard related to the fact that the Commission has set up a high-level expert group to counter fake news and the spread of disinformation online. As Ms. Keller and Mr. Didier said during the debate, it's our common duty, and Ms. Jourová has just confirmed that we are on the same page. So let us combine our institutional forces to ensure that the momentum for researching balanced but effective solutions is kept high on the political agenda in the European Union and across the world. As I said during my intervention, on the 16th of May in Sophia, the head of states or government plan to discuss the need for social networks and digital platforms to guarantee transparent practices and full protection of citizens' privacy and personal data. So the Council will continue to follow this debate very closely, and I can assure members that I paid particular attention to the views expressed here today during this debate. Thank you for your attention. Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Merci, Madame.
Thank you very much. And the debate on this point is now closed. We now move on to the next point. Mr. Karens and Madame Sargentini will be talking about the prevention of the use of the financial system for the purposes of money laundering or terrorist financing. And I'll pass the floor over to Mr. Karens for 4 minutes as rapporteur without further ado.